A very warm welcome to all of you tonight to St. Martin in the Fields. It's so good to have so many with us tonight. Before we begin, I just want to say a few bits of information so that everybody knows. There's a lot of you here tonight, and there's over 400 people watching online, so I'd like to welcome all those who are watching online too. And I know that many of you have questions. So we've given you a QR code there. If while Daniel is speaking, you have any questions, they will be collected and they will ask those questions, or some of those questions, to Daniel in the last half hour that we're together. We're going to be together from 7 o'clock till 8:30. At 8:30, all of you are very warmly invited to come down into the cafe in the crypt, where there's a chance to continue the conversation, both with Daniel and among yourselves, about the things that we've heard tonight. So do come down for that reception in the cafe straight afterwards. St. Martin in the Fields is very fortunate to have worked with 3 different organisations to put together tonight. So we'd like to thank Jamie Eyre and Embrace the Middle East for their help tonight, for John Drake and Boundary Breakers, and of course to Musalaha, of which Daniel is the CEO. We heard Daniel speak here 2 years ago in September 2023. He spoke for only 10 minutes, but he was one of the most powerful speakers we've had. So it's a particular pleasure to welcome him back tonight to give a full lecture here at St. Martin in the Fields. We've got Mike Wooldridge, the former BBC World correspondent, who's going to chair the session, and our vicar, the Reverend Dr. Sam Wells, who's going to respond to what Daniel says. But now, let's give all 3 of them a very warm welcome. Thank you.
And a warm welcome from me too. Apologise for my voice with a long-running cold. Now, even if Hamas had not carried out its deadly attack in southern Israel on October the 7th, 2023, and Israel had not responded the way it has in Gaza and elsewhere, Daniel Munayer's lecture here this evening would have been a major draw for those who are interested in what happens in the Middle East. He and the organization he leads, Musalaha, are among those who work for reconciliation between Israel and Palestinians. The need for it has a long history, a very long history. The cost of not achieving it has been tragically high, and it's been among the most elusive of challenges to would-be peacemakers anywhere in the world. But in the light of all that has happened in that volatile region over the past 18 months since October the 7th, 2023, it is surely all the more important that we have someone in Daniel's position here tonight. The question posed for the lecture is there hope in the Holy Land? Many of us, I suspect, would have concluded from all the violence we've seen in the region, in graphic news reports on television, on the radio, in newspapers over the past 18 months, from the pained and angry interviews we've heard, that there can be very little reason to hope, at least for the foreseeable future, and that anything amounting to reconciliation must now be even more elusive. And what of the particular situation of Christians in Israel and in the Palestinian territories? How have they been impacted in these past 18 months? How much do Christian perspectives differ between the various Christian communities? What can and do they offer to be an influence for reconciliation? Daniel's own influence includes the fact that he was the first Palestinian to personally address the United Nations Security Council. Now, one thing that strikes me, Daniel, is particularly interesting about your perspective on what lies ahead for Palestinians and for Israel is that while the creation of the State of Israel, the Nakba or catastrophe, the expulsion of Palestinians by Zionist militias and Israeli forces, 1948, the subsequent wars in the region, the First Intifada. While they are obviously familiar to you from your family history, you were born into a somewhat different time. The optimism, I imagine, of the Oslo peace process of 1990 and the period immediately after that. Incidentally, also when Musalaha was founded. So it will be very interesting to hear how all of this shapes your view of the precarious present and the possible future. Daniel.
Good evening, everyone. It's a privilege to be back. It's an honor to be back at St. Martin's in the Field. Thank you for having me, and thank you for the introduction. This time I've come to the UK with two reasons. The first reason is the mission-related reason, which is coming and engaging and speaking with people in the UK about what's happening in Palestine and Israel. And the second reason is because I've come to show my fiancée my English roots. My mom's from Bolton, and before coming to London, I spent a few days in Bolton with my fiancée, introducing her to my friends that live there. And I'm happy to report that she could understand what people were saying. So if you'll notice the beautiful woman in purple sitting on the front row, that is my fiancée that has come with me. So the title, Is There Hope in the Holy Land? For Palestinians to talk about hope during these times is absurd. And this is a conversation that needs to be managed very carefully. People from my grandparents' generation who lived through the Nakba, the catastrophe of 1948, say that actually these times are worse than what they lived. I am not a lawyer and a legal expert, but plenty of organizations have been classifying what's happening in Gaza as a genocide. We could look at the International Court of Justice, who have said this is a plausible genocide. The Lemkin Institute for Genocide Prevention and Human Security has classified it as a genocide. Amnesty International has said it's a genocide. UN human rights experts have said it's a genocide. So I've been given the topic of, is there hope in the Holy Land during what legal experts are calling a genocide? In the Palestinian context, hope has been misused and abused. International visitors who come to visit always ask me the question when I speak to them, is there hope? With all the tragedy, is there hope? And the same question comes up again and again and again. And I have to confess, this is my least favorite topic to address. Even for this event, I did not choose the title. I was told that hope is something that will bring people to listen. I trapped you. It's what people want to hear. With all the bad news, with all the things that are happening in Palestine, I was told, Daniel, people won't come to listen to you if the subject is too heavy. People in the UK want to hear hope. So I ask myself, why do people need to jump to hope all the time? What about the reality of our suffering? Our need for justice? Why do you need Palestinians to be hopeful? And it's as if we always need something from the oppressed to make us feel better. Hope, for many people, has become a type of wishful thinking. I hope you're doing well. For many people, it's a type of quick medicine for the tragedies of Palestine. People have turned hope into a means of evading responsibility and becoming passive. If Palestinians are hopeful, we can feel better and be optimistic. But hope is not optimism. Hope should not be a topic that makes us passive. When people, without engaging and taking action, follow the Palestinian struggle for justice, without action, they start becoming consumers of content. They become consumers of our situation. And as a result of consuming our situation and consuming our struggle without your action and engagement, you consume and we become a product. Our identities as Palestinians become a product. People start consuming specific aspects of the struggle and others not. We want to hear specifically from a Palestinian Christian, but we're not interested to hear from Palestinian Muslims. We're specifically interested in hearing from a Palestinian woman, but not interested from hearing from men. We want to hear from a Bedouin, and the categorization goes on, and we as Palestinians are categorized into people's consumption preferences. People want to consume my hope. I would like to challenge that today and start with a new premise as we engage with one another today. People consume the identity of people they approve and people they do not, which determines the framework of engagement. We include and exclude Palestinians based on who we want to listen to versus what we really need as a people. When I become a product of your consumption, I am dehumanized in the process. And when I get dehumanized, when you consume my identity and hope, real solidarity is not possible. It blocks the real human connection. I don't want you to have come tonight if listening to hope is going to make you feel better and make you passive about genocide. This creates an unhealthy relationship, and you see Palestinians who start to sell themselves. They embrace the consumer-product relationship. And the shift changes from real action and community care to marketing. You see in the pro-Palestinian camp the celebritizing of Palestinians. Look, we have a Palestinian. We have to listen to what they have to say. And in the pro-Israel camp, we will only consume and listen to a Palestinian if an Israeli validates what this person has to say. If we approve that this Palestinian is not a threat. So today, if you don't mind, I'm asking you, please, don't jump to hope. But we need to sit with the suffering and the disparity. We need to be like Mary, who sat at the pain and the trauma of the cross. We should not jump from Good Friday to Resurrection Sunday without Holy Saturday. The despair of Palestine necessitates hope. I think of the story of Mary and Martha, who ran to Jesus, telling him that Lazarus had died. Now, Jesus knew that he was going to resurrect Lazarus. So why did he cry? Why did Jesus cry? It says, Jesus wept. John 11, verse 35. What Jesus was doing, he was showing true human solidarity with people's suffering. True love, in this time for me, has become staying in close proximity to Jesus even in the worst and darkest times. So I'd like us to, before we start and jump into hope, I'd like us to take just a moment to embrace, to sit with, to understand the suffering that is happening in Gaza, but across all of Palestine. I'd like for us to think about the 1.9 million people who are living in tents without running water, electricity, under constant bombardment. Yet my faith, at the same time, calls for hope. So how do I address this hope? How do I understand what biblical hope means? The Christian hope of the oppressed is commitment to the kingdom of God where Jesus is king. Today we are living in what we call the in-between times. We have Jesus' inauguration of the kingdom of God 2,000 years ago, and we have the completion of the kingdom of God that is to come. And in the meantime, we are living in between times where Jesus has won over death, but we continue to live in a world full of evil, suffering, and wickedness. So hope is joining the alternative narrative that was presented by Jesus. He presented a new vision, new creation, and has invited us to participate in his mission of reconciling the world back to God's self. Reconciliation means restoring relationships, being in healthy relationships with one another. Injustice is when we are living in broken relationships. unhealthy relationships. So we ask ourselves, how do we restore relationships with Palestinians and Israelis when a genocide is taking place and we are living under occupation? But hope is a transformative power that compels us into the work of reconciliation. A reconciliation that is committed to the liberation of the oppressed. A reconciliation that puts the human need for freedom at the center. If you don't understand the Palestinians' need for freedom, you haven't understood our humanity. For our humanity is directly connected to our need for freedom. Biblical hope declares that victory of the oppressors and oppression is temporary. That those who bomb, kill, rape, occupy, colonize, building walls, settlements, stealing land, will not have the last say. Hope resists evil. Hope is also truthful. Hope must face the ugly reality that we live in. Hope is connected deeply to our struggle against injustice. Hope compels us to speak up. Hope compels us to speak the truth. I was having lunch earlier today with some members from Musalaha, UK, and I was told that Quakers, 2 minutes down the road, 6 of them were arrested by 20 policemen. Quakers. Because they wanted to mobilize in action for Palestine. People are being arrested back home for posting Instagram posts. People are losing their jobs back home for posting stories and posts on Instagram. We see on the news that people in the UK are being denied the right to protest if it's for Palestine. There was a video in which a police officer said, "You can't protest for Palestine." And they asked him, "But if we were protesting for Israel, could we?" And he said yes in a weird way. Universities in the United States are silencing their students. They're arresting professors. We're talking about deportations of international students. And the Oscar-winning, the man who just won the Oscar for No Other Land, Hamdan Bilal, was lynched. He won the Oscars depicting the injustice, the colonization in Masafir Yatta. He went back home, he was lynched by Israeli settlers, and when they called an ambulance for him, the soldiers removed him from the ambulance. And we still haven't heard about him. Hope requires us to speak up. The theologian Jürgen Moltmann writes, "Faith, whenever develops into hope, causes not rest, but unrest. Hope draws us from passive comfort into costly solidarity. Hope draws us into a life of love for humanity. It's we that create hope. Hope also gives us the power to persevere. In Arabic, the Palestinians are very familiar with the word sumud, to be steadfast. Without hope, it's hard to persevere. We become weary and tired. Without hope, it's easy to get distracted and self-absorbed. Hope keeps us moving forward, pursuing reconciliation. Hope allows us to imagine. Even if you are not religious and you have come today to listen, we can all imagine a better world. How we act now, in the present, is shaped by what we believe the future can become. Imagination is not a neutral space. We need to challenge people imagining a reality of segregation and supremacy. If we don't hope and if we don't imagine, we are leaving hope and imagination to other people, to our oppressors. Our hoping imagination must have reconciliation to be loving. When you imagine a way that we can live together as equals, you start to see your enemy through the lens of humanity. Imagination of a shared land shapes the way we act and interpret the present. But colonialism will want to control, limit, and manipulate our imagination. Hope liberates our imagination. Without hope, I become a slave to other people's idea of hope or fall into nihilism. I was wondering, why were so many Palestinians so upset with the documentary No Other Land? The backlash that people, the hate that people had towards this documentary puzzled me. I thought they depicted really well the struggle that people are having there under Israeli occupation and colonialism, the displacement. While they destroyed, they rebuilt. And I came to the conclusion that there are some people who it upset them that an Israeli was involved in the movie because in their imagination, in their hope, they hope for a Palestine that's liberated with no Israeli Jewish presence. We need to imagine a new model of humanity. Not the Zionist model of humanity, in which you have Jews on top, non-Jews then, and then you have the Palestinians, and then we'll start with the Christians and then the Muslims. But at the same time, we don't want a model of humanity in which any group of people are going to be on top of the other. We need to imagine a model of humanity in which we all come together as equals. But I'm here to share that hope is going to come at a cost. Hope for Palestinians and also Israelis who are committed to reconciliation is costly. We risk being disappointed. We risk being ostracized. We risk being arrested and attacked, persecuted and killed. I currently am leading a group of Israelis and Palestinians who came together with a starting point that we're all against the occupation. But this group of people is paying a very high price for meeting with one another. Currently, to travel from Ramallah to Bethlehem is taking the participants 6 to 7 hours in order to meet and risk being called traitors by their own community as they meet with Israelis. For the Israelis that are meeting with the Palestinians for joint action against the occupation, they're also risking their relationship with their family, with their friends. They get risk being labeled traitors by their own community. The people who are joining Musalaha's work are paying the price. But I ask, are you in the UK also willing to pay a price for hope, for reconciliation? Solidarity with the oppressed comes with a cost. In Palestine, the UK is part of the problem, historically, but also today. Did you know that the British government, using its military base in Cyprus, has surveilled on behalf of Israel more than the Germans and the Americans? That weapons are being sold to the Israeli military to continue with the bombardment? This is an international ecosystem that is executing this genocide. So do not be deceived, you are not far away. This is called direct involvement. I've been thinking about the parable of the Good Samaritan. I'll assume that most of us are familiar, but the essential question about cost in the parable of the Good Samaritan, the question about personal welfare and fear, is switched. The identity of the injured man on the road is concealed. We don't know his identity. But the parable focuses not on what happens to me if I help the man on the road, but what will happen to him if I don't help him. Joining the work of reconciliation will cost you. There's no way around it. Reconciliation for the oppressed will mean continue fighting for justice and liberation. And reconciliation for those coming from positions of power will mean sacrifice and a cost. It cost Jesus his life to reconcile the world to God's self. Perhaps this is what Jesus meant for us when Jesus said, "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me." I'd like you to ask today, what is your cross? What is your engagement with what's happening in Palestine? I was in Bolton and I was in Durham And what people are telling me that Gaza is no longer on the news. It's shifted to Ukraine. As if we can only consume one situation at a time. Jesus continued and said, "For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will find it." As we think about hope, I'd like us to step away from the quick medicine and the feel-good. I want you to feel unrest if your faith develops to hope. So I hope that your hope will be taken out of this church and translated into action for the oppressed in order to contribute to opposing one of the worst human tragedies in history, for you to stand with your brothers and sisters in Palestine, Christian and Muslim, and also for those brave Israeli Jews who are willing to denounce their privilege and join the struggle for reconciliation and liberation. Thank you.
Daniel, I want to honor you personally for your extraordinary dignity, courage, wisdom, and grace. In Monsignor Quixote, Graham Greene says, a believer will fight another believer over a shade of difference, a doubter doubts alone. I imagine in the conversation downstairs shortly, there will be a lot of believers, and my guess is a lot of us, even amongst those in this church tonight, have disagreed passionately with one another about how to implement the call that Daniel is putting on our hearts. And one will bring some data from the latest video that's been circulated, and others will take the latest directive from a religious official, but deep down it's coming from a place of love and powerlessness that my guess is, I think I can reasonably assume that everybody here tonight is heartbroken about the situation that Daniel has described so vividly. And the temptation is for us to fall out with one another about differences in how we respond rather than combine together and realize what together we can do that we can't do alone. What I'm so moved by about Daniel's witness tonight is how he has modeled the future that he is outlining for us. There is no talk of supremacy in Daniel. There is no hatred in Daniel. Just 50 yards from where we're sitting, well, I'm not sitting, but where you're sitting, is the statue of Edith Cavell. And on the front of that statue it says, "I have realized that patriotism is not enough. I must have no hatred for anyone." There is no hatred in Daniel. In anything he said tonight, there is no hatred. Is Daniel not the first person you've listened to in the last 18 months on this subject in whom there is no hatred? I admire that. There is no exclusion. And there is extraordinary sacrifice, that vivid picture of the time it takes to travel from Ramallah to Bethlehem, and the cost of family relationships and personal relationships and friendships, simply to model a future by talking to a person from another place in this conflict. How admirable is that? Daniel is a man who has taken up his cross and followed, and he is asking us simply to do the same. I want to reflect with you on not just the word hope, but to place that word for a moment in a context of two other words with which the New Testament associates with it. And some of my remarks are directly addressed to those who call themselves Christians, and some have a wider reference. St. Paul, in the passage he didn't write for weddings, but is often read at weddings, speaks of faith, hope, and love. What is faith? Faith is conviction about what God has done. Here's a question. Do we believe that in Jesus we have seen all there is to see of God? In other words, can we place our confidence that the God we see in Jesus is a God whose character does not change? And therefore, the Jesus that walked to the cross, as Daniel reminded us, is the Jesus we will see on the last day. That Jesus calls us to no other form of following other than to do as he did and to walk in his steps. And Daniel has described how he himself and others are doing exactly that today. I think it's only in the strength of that conviction, faith in what God has done, that we can actually have hope about what God will do. How can we trust somebody, in this case God, in the future unless we look at their record in the past? Hope we've heard about tonight, and we've heard some powerful words about how hope can be manipulated and trivialized and commodified. But proper hope about what God will do in the future, that's what hope is, does, as Daniel has put it, liberate our imagination. An Anglican priest in Northern Ireland called Bill Arlo in the 80s said what I found some very helpful words. It's better to fail in a cause that will finally succeed than to succeed in a cause that will finally fail. To me, those words embody hope. They embody what hope in the Holy Land means today. They embody Daniel himself. Failing in a cause that will ultimately succeed. It all feels like failure at the moment. But we know, we trust, if we trust that the God we have seen in Jesus is the truth about the universe, we know that what Daniel is calling us to do will finally succeed. Christopher Columbus gets a pretty bad press for a lot of good reasons these days. But one thing that inspires me about him is that he wrote in his log for 15 consecutive days in 1492, no land in sight, kept sailing. No land in sight, kept sailing. That's hope. That's hope. And that's those who have hope for the Holy Land have been writing that in their log for the last 400 days and will continue to do so. And I imagine almost everybody here tonight is among that number. So if that's what faith and hope are, what is love? Well, love is in the light of the faith in what God has done in the past and in the light of the hope of what God will do in the future. Love is how we live now in the present with that past and future inspiring us. Well, I think Daniel tonight has given us some profound challenges. I think he said tonight to us that love means, first of all, humble confession. Confession about our consumption. As Daniel said, people want to consume my hope. I don't know about you, but I winced about my own failures when I heard Daniel say that. He's challenged us about our own passivity. He's challenged us about our own complicity in an international ecosystem that is executing this genocide, as he put it. So we begin on our knees in this conversation. But he's also challenged us in the words of what he called real solidarity. Now, the theological term for real solidarity is the communion of saints. And he spoke about consuming hope, which to me spoke of the Eucharist, in which we do consume hope appropriately. The communion of saints is our unity with those who have struggled historically, struggle around the world today, and will finally be vindicated at God's right hand in glory. And we are part of all of those stories at the same time. As Daniel put it, hope is joining the alternative narrative provided by Jesus Christ. That alternative narrative is called the communion of saints. He challenged us, thirdly, in the way of love, to listen rather than consume. There's a lot of debate about speaking out and using our power, and Daniel used the phrase earlier about some members of the Jewish community in the Holy Land being aware of their privilege. It seems to me important that when we are called to speak out, we don't make the story about us. The story is centrally about the Palestinian people in the light of the existence of the State of Israel. So, of course, we speak out. We must speak out, but we mustn't make the story about ourselves. We must remember who should be at the center of this story. So, the last thing that he called us to do in the way of love, to practice our faith, to perform our hope, is to pay a price for hope. Tonight we have heard somebody who has paid a very, very big price for hope. Somebody who has taken up his cross and followed and has not looked back. The question he's laid on our hearts very explicitly is, what is the price we are prepared to pay for hope? And will we take up our cross and follow too? Thank you.
And thank you, Daniel. Before we turn to your questions, there's just a few that I want to ask. Daniel, if I can just bring you back up to the microphone. I wonder, you talked about the need for a new model of humanity at one point, and I wonder if we can put some shape to that. Let me make an assumption that that new model of humanity would be based on, indeed, a proper, what you would call a true reconciliation, a reconciliation that very much involves justice and equal opportunities for all and various other factors. But in terms of the politics of it, as you know well, there's long time now been an international vision for what's always called a two-state solution, an Israeli state alongside a Palestinian state. As far as I'm aware, the current Israeli government is opposed to that, showing no enthusiasm for that at all, and it seems, at the moment at least, to be pretty dead in the water. What do you think, and what, if you can speak for Palestinians as widely as you can on this, and maybe particularly your generation of them, How important is that, the pursuit? Do you agree that yourself that there should be a two-state solution, or is that not necessarily the most important thing in putting political shape to what you'd like to see happen?
Thank you. I cannot speak on behalf of Palestinians, and that's because I'm not a representative that people have voted for, but also Palestinian society has become so fragmented that the realities of Palestinian across Palestine are so different, and it's very difficult to find a concisive view on this subject. But I can tell you from my own experience, people from my generation do not see the two-state solution as something politically possible anymore. And the two-state solution is largely seen as a smokescreen by Western powers and Israel to continue further colonizing Palestine. Palestinians, pretty much from the beginning, have called the state of Israel a settler colonial state, in which you have a sending power, which was Great Britain, who, through officially the Balfour Declaration in 1917, provided the Zionist movement legitimacy to continue establishing a new home on the expense of Palestinians. So I don't think the two-state solution was ever an option in terms of the political framework that people are offering on the ground, and I also think that it's continuously used as a smokescreen to distract from the real issue, which is Zionist settlers who are dispossessing the indigenous people of Palestine. The conflict is not between two national movements, but between a settler movement and the native community that is hanging on to the land with their dear lives. So I think we need to use our imagination outside of these solutions that are being proposed.
And so what does your imagination suggest to you could be a possible alternative to the two-state solution?
I'm not a political scientist who can now break it down a solution. But what I can say is that we need to think of frameworks, political frameworks that have principles that respect the dignity of every human that lives in that area. Take, for example, the two-state solution. So the Palestinians in the West Bank, Gaza and East Jerusalem, let's use our imagination, would have a state, but what about the 2 million Palestinians that live inside Israel? Do we accept that they would live under Jewish supremacy? I think that when we're talking about Palestinian freedom and liberation, it has to include all the Palestinians. And I think that's why there's so much violence, because the current setup, which says that only one group of people has a right to self-determination, is the root reason, one of the root causes for all the violence and turmoil.
Can I just put to you one at least of the questions that I threw out when I was introducing you about the Christian community or communities? There are so many. Can we just map something with you? What figure do you use for the total number of Christians in Israel and in the Palestinian territories today?
I think we're talking about, if I'm not mistaken, 150,000 Christians, in which most are Catholic and Greek Orthodox. Yep. and you have Protestant minority, you have Anglican, Lutheran, and then other types of Protestants as well.
Yep. I think everything is slightly higher figure than that in the 180,000, I think, possibly, but yeah.
I'm not exactly sure of the exact number.
Yeah. My question that I posed at the beginning was, because I think it is interesting to understand this, there's quite a wide range of perspectives on the current situation, no doubt, and on potential future solutions across those Christian communities, isn't there? Could you just cite a few to give us a sense of the range of views there are across the Christian population?
I think that...
And no doubt be influenced by people's living conditions and situation.
Yeah, I think the major living condition that people are facing is what's causing a lot of Christian immigration from Palestine. You have Christians leaving in high numbers. I was in Bethlehem the other day, and I was talking to my friend, and he said that this week we know of 3 Christian families that have immigrated outside of Palestine. So I think that the question is, how do we continue to support the Christian presence to stay and to live and thrive in Palestine? And it's very, very difficult when you're living under occupation. So I think the general view of all Palestinians is that Israeli occupation and theft and colonization of the land needs to end. And you do have some Palestinians, which I think are a minority voice, that are being, let's call it, influenced by Western Christians, particularly Christian Zionists, that might offer a different view, that are saying that the root issue that we have in Palestine is Hamas or Muslim extremism, what people would call. But that is not the general view of the majority of the Palestinians that I encounter and talk to.
In your own description of your own identity, where do you place your being a Christian and your being, at least in part, Palestinian? I know you're British Palestinian, but where do you place those two, the Palestinian side of you and the Christian?
They come together. For me, I don't exactly separate them. They come together, but perhaps you could say that in terms of the way society sees me, they first categorize me and see me as a Palestinian before a Christian, and also being a Christian is, at the end of the day, also a choice. In addition to it being your identity, it's also a choice, particularly if you're going to take it seriously and try to live it out. So in that order, I would probably say Palestinian and then Christian, but I really think it comes together.
Yeah. And just one final question from me before we pick up the various questions you've submitted. Some seem to say, and I'm interested to know what you feel about this, that things have quite possibly changed forever in the Middle East as a result of what's happened in these last 18 months. Do you agree with that?
I think that things have changed in the Middle East far before what happened in the past 18 months. And the reality for Palestinians has gotten worse, but we're already talking about a constant state of occupation and people's basic rights being denied. So in that framework, of course, the situation was already dire before. But of course, I mean, if you look at the situation for the people in Gaza, they've completely carpet-bombed the whole area. So people's lives, of course, are going to be changed, and the United States and other Western powers are trying to remap the Middle East. So I do think there are attempts to try and make sure that they continue to do that with different normalization agreements with Arab countries.
Right. Can I invite some of the questions we have from you, and indeed those on not only in person here, online as well, I imagine. And those are going to be, a selection of them at least, are going to be read out for us.
Yes, thank you everyone for your questions from online. If you do have any questions that you have written down, please hold them up in the air on a piece of paper. Our first question is from Sean, who says, should the question not be, how can we create hope? The Northern Ireland peace process shows that hope can be created out of terrible violence and despair.
So what's exactly the question? Seems like he's answered his own question.
Well, what do you think about that?
As a Christian, I'm committed to non-violence. Can violence reap certain results for people in their own ways, in certain situations? Perhaps, but as a Christian, I'm committed to non-violence, and any reconciliation process has to involve humanization. And what violence does, it dehumanizes. So I would argue that in the long run, you have to start a humanization process of your neighbor and your enemy. And if you don't do that, you risk, as an oppressed person, becoming a sub-oppressor. The moment that you take, for example, what I would consider the political and military wing of Hamas, I do think that they have become sub-oppressors, not only in that they haven't consulted and involved the Palestinian people in the process of their actions, but also in terms of their model of humanity. The model of humanity that is being offered is one in which you have an Islamic one that comes first, and that would include also oppressing other Muslims that don't agree with this type of ideology and view. And then you'll have other groups that would fall under it. So what we're talking about is the moment we act violently, we risk becoming sub-oppressors ideologically and in personal acts of violence. And they run the risk of becoming what they are resisting.
Thank you.
I have another question which is anonymous, but they've asked, other than prayers, what can we do to help?
There's two answers to that question. The first answer is please get involved and get engaged with organizations that are involved with reconciliation and justice initiatives regarding the Palestinian struggle. Tonight you see several organizations that are involved. You have Musalaha UK, Embrace the Middle East, Boundary Breakers. These are organizations that have been doing good work for a long time. So get involved with different organizations and ask them how they can get involved. One of the best ways is also to come on an educational trip so that you can see the reality for yourself. So there are organizations that are doing that. You have to be careful not to fall into the typical sort of Zionist trail of pilgrimage, that will ignore and avoid Palestinians at all costs. But the second answer to this question is you also need to think for yourself and figure it out. I am living in Jerusalem trying to, the best I can, to direct a reconciliation organization. I cannot think of also solutions for people living in the UK. So it's a bit of a lazy question, because you have to think for yourself how you're going to take action in your own context. I don't know the ins and outs, besides Bolton, you could argue. So it's also for the people here to think, how do we become effective in this specific place? What speaks to people here? How do I engage with the government, with civil society? So it's this person's responsibility as well.
Good, thank you. And the next?
We have a question here from Hudson, who asks, how do we engage with our Israeli friends who are unwilling to compromise their views on Palestinians? And at what point should we draw the line in these relationships?
It's a good question. I ask myself this question often. And I've reached somewhat of a framework for myself that's helpful for me, and I'll share it. For the unwavering Israelis, Jews that are extremely Zionist and are unwilling to listen and don't want to engage, the nature of the engagement that I have with these Israeli Jews is one of confrontation and challenge, because they are unwilling to see my humanity. If you're not willing to see my humanity, if you're not willing to see that we have a shared humanity, that I made in the image of God and so are you, and you're unwilling to see that we share this humanity, the way that I can love them is by challenging and confronting them. Challenging and confronting them is loving them. I'm not talking about getting physical, I'm talking about a respectful confrontation and challenge. Because if they are unable to see that we have a shared humanity, the image of God in them starts to become warped. That's if you want to engage at all. Because if you do engage with the unwavering Israeli Jewish Zionists, you have to understand that you are going directly against their Zionist interests and their views, and they're going to get upset. So if you want to engage at all, I think it should involve constant challenging and confrontation in the most humanizing way possible. Then there's another group of Israeli Jews that are not the unwavering Zionists, but are the Zionists that they've got one leg here and one leg here, and they're not exactly sure how they're going to go through this process of believing in human rights and equality, but also believing in the Zionist ideology. These people that have this inner tension in them, I would argue that the nature of engagement, the love in this context, is one of education. That we should, and at times also confrontation, of course. But these are people who would be willing to protest the return of the hostages and for LGBTQ rights, but ignore Palestinians. Their understanding of Palestinians hasn't taken the risk of love. It hasn't translated into action. And I would argue that the nature of that engagement should be one of education and at times confrontation. And then you have the Israeli Jews who have challenged their Zionist views, who are what many would call post-Zionist, and some would even call themselves anti-Zionists. And I would argue for Palestinians and others, it's our responsibility to make space for these people to join our struggle for justice. And rejecting them at this point would risk painting our movement as racist, because we start rejecting them for who they are and not what they do or what they believe. But there's a risk also when you invite Israeli Jews into a reconciliation process. And there's two main risks. The first risk, and you'll see that also many times in the UK, the moment they join a reconciliation process and they feel like that they've had an awakening, their eyes have been opened, they assume leadership straight away. And that's the same for reconciliation processes between white and black people, between other dominant groups and powerless groups. The strong group always assumes leadership. So I think that the reconciliation process and engaging with these people needs to be involved and led by the oppressed. It's number one. The second is that the authenticity of their conversion is to be decided also by the oppressed. We, the Palestinians, are to decide if your conversion is authentic, not yourself. So I know he asked specifically about one group of people, but I wanted to give a framework of engagement and what has helped me try to be as loving as possible to my neighbor. But my engagement of love and the engagement will look different according to your position towards my humanity.
No, thank you for doing that. That was very interesting. Can I just break in actually with one? When I was reading about Musalaha, I was reading about what sounded like very interesting work that would take place in the desert. I think in Jordan, in fact, in the Jordanian desert, you would take different groups of people over and have them live in a very simple way together for a few days. First of all, I wonder what came from that process, and also whether in the light of everything that's happening at the moment, whether that continues.
So I'll answer the second. It is continuing. This year we have the most desert encounters we've ever had in the history of our organization. We're taking 6 groups to the desert. We're planning to take 6 groups to the desert. The desert is a very important and significant place for the work that we do. The desert is a more neutral space that allows people to come together. The desert removes people from the colonial political structure. You're not faced with checkpoints. You're not faced with a wall. You are not in danger of the other communities when you're meeting with the other. So the desert is a very important aspect of the reconciliation process. And when we take people to the desert, we first encourage people to listen. We start with active listening, and you have to first listen to the desert before you start listening to one another. And the desert is also a place that the shared humanity starts being revealed, because after a few days, it doesn't matter if your skin color, your gender, or how much money you have in your bank, we start to smell the same after a few days in the desert. And the desert is also a very important place theologically. It's a place where God has revealed God's self throughout all Scripture. Abraham, Moses, Elijah, John the Baptist, Jesus, and even in the Islamic tradition, the Quran was revealed in the desert. So the desert is a very important place, and the desert is also what we're calling, it's a place that indigenizes the reconciliation process. We have many peace models that are offered from the West, and they do two things. Or they assume that religion is a source of violence, and therefore we have to ignore religion and let's just meet together and become friends. Or that's people-to-people model, it's called. Or the other model is called interreligious dialogue, in which we bring different priests, rabbis, sheikhs, and they have a conversation between them. And that's going to get us closer to peace. And there's issues with it, because first it excludes women from the process, it excludes young people from the process, and also it assumes that religion is the problem again, and that it's for religious leaders to solve the problem. So the desert is a place where it sets the playing field for everyone. And the word for in Hebrew for desert is the same word as to speak. So it's a very important place for people that have a desert. I know in the UK you don't have a desert, but you can go to the forest, or you have nice islands. Right?
Thank you.
Yes, you just spoke a little bit about it, Daniel, but could you tell us a bit more about the work that you do with your organization?
So the work we do is we take groups of Israelis and Palestinians, and also we have tracks for intra-Palestinian reconciliation between Muslims and Christians. And what we do is we take people into the desert, like I just explained, for 5 days. And in those 5 days, we start different activities. And the first activity, as I said, is active listening. We have to learn how to listen to each other, even if we disagree. But the starting point for people who come to our activities is that both Israelis and Palestinians, the starting point is that we're all against the occupation. I think it's unethical to ask Palestinians to engage in such a program if there isn't this starting point. And then after the desert, we have between 6 to 8 weekend meetings once a month, in which we continue the process and we explore identity and narrative, but also other subjects such as power and forgiveness. And the challenge of each group is, can you create an alternative narrative? And is your identity a source of goodness and blessing to your enemy? And is your theology a source of blessing and goodness to your enemy? If not, it needs to be, people need to reclaim their identity. And the last component after they've gone through this process is taking action. If you meet in the desert and you meet in the weekends and you do all of this process and it doesn't lead to action, it's what Palestinians call normalization, in which we are normalizing occupation, we're normalizing injustice. And I think this is a loophole, what I would call co-resistance, non-violent co-resistance, in which Israelis and Palestinians come together to non-violently resist occupation, to resist the colonial narrative. And there are examples of this also in scriptures, of co-resistance. Take, for example, the network of women in Exodus chapter 2 who saved the life of Moses. It was Hebrew women and Egyptian women who saved his life. And it meant that both the Hebrew women and the Egyptian women had to practice civil disobedience against Pharaoh, the Caesar of the Egyptians, the empire. In addition to that, the Egyptian princess also funded the Hebrew underground movement in Exodus. So this is an example of where the Egyptians, the upper class, the privileged, even a princess, was able to join the movement of the oppressed, fund it, and save the life of Moses, who later led the liberation. And then you have also, in an intra-First Jewish Palestine co-resistance, and I always think about it, Jesus bringing together Simon the Zealot and Matthew the tax collector. Matthew the tax collector being a man who was profiting from occupation, Roman occupation, and taking advantage of his own people. It sounds familiar in the Palestinian context. And then you have the Zealots, who used hostage-taking and assassinations against the Romans in order to resist their occupation. Probably also sounds familiar. So what did Jesus require of a zealot and a tax collector when they came together? And it was joining this new narrative. It's not choosing violence of the zealots, but it's not also exploiting and taking advantage of occupation. It's a new creation, a new narrative that people had.
Thank you very much indeed. We are getting towards our conclusion. And I'm going to take the liberty of encouraging some queue jumping here for one particular person who's in our front row. Bishop William Shamali happens to be in this country as well at the moment. He's from the, Roman Catholic from the Latin Patriarchates in Jerusalem. And he, in fact, was speaking earlier today at the Bloomsbury Baptist Church just up the road. Now, I gather, I was quite surprised to find this in very much your fields cross in so many ways. The first time I think you have met, at least physically, is today. And I am just wondering, I know we've got other people queuing up to ask some, but I'm just wondering if you might have any brief observation of your own, any comments on Daniel's contribution, or any question you would like to ask him as a result of what he's said. So it's just, yes, you can come up to ask him. It's essentially the opportunity to ask a question.
I would like to turn my shoulder, so I do this.
Sure.
Thank you for inviting me to give a brief talk. First, I admire what Daniel said courageously about the oppression in Britain here. I followed the vocabulary used by Daniel. The main vocabulary used by him was oppression, justice, hope, and reconciliation. Which comes first? First comes oppression, then hope, because justice will not come the same day or the following day. So we have to have resilience to wait for the justice to come. Now we are living in the time of hope, not a human hope. From the human point of view, we are hopeless because with 1 million settlers, and the word settler is very polite, very positive. When we say the first American settlers, it's not so negative. You use the word colonization, which is closer to reality. So they are colonizer more than settlers because of the connotation. After justice comes reconciliation. Someone may ask, where is forgiveness? Forgiveness is included in reconciliation because both should forgive to each other because both hated each other. So this should be done. Maybe I don't agree fully with Daniel on one point, so I agree 99%. We cannot live together in one state because if we put all Palestinians together between the sea and the river, they will be as numerous as Israelis. So the dream of a Jewish state will be a failure. And they will never accept to have a democratic state where Palestinians and Israelis are living together. It's impossible. So one state is not realistic. Two states in the present situation is very difficult to achieve, but still it is the unique solution. Why? Gaza is separated from the West Bank, so we need a big corridor to link Gaza to the Holy Land, to West Bank. Don't forget Gaza, if it uses its gas, which is underground, it will become like Singapore. It will be rich. So it will be reconstructed with the resources coming from Gaza. I won't be long. So if Israel gives a big corridor to Palestinians to go from Gaza to West Bank, in exchange, Palestinians would give Israel the same area, the equal of this area. So some settlements built illegally in the West Bank will be added to Israel. This is what we call swap. After Palestinians have the self-determination, they can decide if they want to make confederation with Jordan. Jordan is the unique country where Palestinians can go without a visa. Okay. Without Jordan, we are in a great prison. So there is a solution, but we have to have good intention, peace, peace of mind, and it will come one day. We have to pray, because the Lord finally is the strongest, and He is the source of our unique hope. Thank you.
No, thank you very much indeed. Thank you for your perspective on it. Daniel, very last word for you as our principal guest tonight, and particularly perhaps whether you had any response to what Bishop William was saying there. But just your final thought for everybody to take away, and then I'm going to ask Embrace the Middle East to actually close our whole session. So,
sorry, I didn't.
Any final thought from you for people to take away? I mean, the Bishop was in 99% agreement with you, so you probably haven't got too much to respond to.
I'll take the 99%.
Okay.
We like to focus on the 1%, though, sometimes. I just want to say thank you for everyone who is already involved, and I think really I've had to say what I need to say, and yeah, I appreciate also everybody that's helped organize and get this opportunity into the making. So yeah, I'm very humbled, and thank you to everyone.
Thank you. On that note, let us embrace the Middle East.
Thank you. And just to wrap us up, Mike, thanks very much for the introduction. As Mike shared, my name is Jamie. I'm the Chief Exec of Embrace the Middle East, who, along with St. Martin's and our friends at Boundary Breakers and Musalaha UK, have put on the event this evening. A wonderful evening of challenge, and I hope that we all come away slightly changed. I've got the honour of bringing the formal proceedings to a close. And firstly, a very warm, I'm not going to turn around because you'll lose my voice, but Daniel, thank you so much for what you have shared. And I don't wish to leave a glib thank you. You've given us such strong food for thought, and I was struck as you spoke that my desire, I've scratched the word hope, my desire is that we were consumers, we examine ourselves and we become doers. And to co-opt the words from James in chapter 1, verse 22, that we are not merely hearers and deceive ourselves, but we are doers. Also to the Reverend Dr. Sam Wells and to Richard Carter, thank you so much for hosting us this evening, Sam, for your excellent response. And Mike, thank you so much for holding the proceedings together. It's a pleasure to be on a platform with somebody who I've listened to and watched on the TV so many years. It's a fabulous privilege. And just to say a few words about Embrace the Middle East, you may not know us. For 170 years, we are not John Lee Come Latelys. We've been partnering and walking with local Christians across the Middle East, supporting them in their social ministries, in their social witness, in the lands that Daniel's been speaking about, and more widely across Egypt, Lebanon, Syria, and Iraq. Daniel is a brilliant example of the sort of people, the sort of local Christians that we have the chance and the privilege to work with and to walk alongside, supporting people who are in really difficult situations, the marginalised, the vulnerable, working for justice and providing them with the things that they need at the point of need without any questions asked. And today we work with 40 organisations, very similar to Musalaha, but across a range of fields in health, education, community development, reconciliation. We would really love you to join with Embrace and Musalaha UK. We invite you to give this evening, to partner with both of us. There's a collection at the end as you leave. Any funds that you give will be shared between Embrace and Musalaha. You can also donate online. There is a QR code here. You'll find these on your seats. Please take these away with you. Please read the information there from Embrace, from Boundary Breakers. There's also going to be information from Musalaha UK at the door and also downstairs. This is the formal close of the evening, so you can breathe easy now. But you are very welcome to join us. Please don't run away. There's going to be a reception in the cafe in the crypt. Richard advises me that the best way to get out of the building is to walk straight out the main doors, take a right and walk down the spiral staircase to your right. There is also a stand where you can buy some books written by Daniel's father, who founded Musalaha, and there's a range of other Middle Eastern products that Embrace is selling. There's a chance to speak together, to be together. We would all love to talk to you, so please come and speak to anybody with a badge on from Embrace or Musalaha or Daniel. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been a real pleasure to be with you this evening. Thank you very much.